Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de unplandivino.net. Vamos a seguir con este encuentro sobre lógica, emociones y verdad. Y lo estamos visualizando con Clau y seguimos con Clau. ¿Qué tal? Un día, a los 2 o 3 días, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo estamos?
Hola, Iván. Muy bien, muy agradecida. Acá recibiendo la primavera en un ambiente casi desértico,
sin
con
volcanes,
lluvia.
ni terremotos, ¿no? Solo con
sin volcanes, sin terremotos. Bueno, tenemos otro tipo de sismos, pero sí, que no se perciben, lamentablemente.
Luego, a ver si tenemos fuerzas, hacemos una llamada después de esta segunda hora. Más o menos son 3. Este taller nos quedará, después de grabar esto, una buena hora y media también, que sería toda la segunda sesión, que ya no dura tanto como 2 horas y cuarto como esta, y en esa que seguirá poniendo en práctica, por así decir, las cosas vistas aquí. Esto también va a ser con muchos ejemplos, como vemos ya aquí en el título. Y luego a ver si hacemos eso, una llamada también de comentarios como la última, que la verdad es que salieron cosas muy interesantes, pero bueno, luego lo comentamos. Vamos a seguir directamente y en el índice, como siempre, el índice de tiempos que lo pongo en la descripción o en los comentarios, podéis ir saltando a los temas y si sirve o lo que sea. Bueno, que allá vamos.
Can I just get you to please put the stuff that here into the context of your own experience? How have you come to these? How have you used these in your own life and struggles? Or is that a question?
Yeah. If I can give it, basically my entire life is built upon these 6 things. Actually, my entire life, I don't ever hold on to an opinion as truth unless it is in this range of emotions here and intellect here. So I don't hold on to any other truth unless it goes into both of those boxes. Now, I can bring probably lots of different examples to it. Okay, is there a law of attraction? Well, let's say at the beginning, all you're doing is asking the question, is there a law of attraction? Now, many people in the world would say there's no such thing as a law of attraction, right? But my suggestion is, instead of saying there is no such thing, you first need to go through and do some experiments. So what I do with my life is I experiment. So I go, okay, firstly, I experiment with my mind. I go, okay, if there is such a thing as a law of attraction, then the way that it's been presented to me by society generally, or by people who think they know about the law of attraction, is that all I need to do is think something long enough and it will happen. Now, I don't know if you've ever put that into practice, but I haven't found that to work myself, right? So after I did some experiments about that, I believed that if there was a law of attraction, then it had nothing to do with the mind. It's a valid assumption based on the experiments that I undertook in terms of thinking something and whether it came true or not. And then what I did was I had to be far more self-reflective and humble, and I had to feel about my own emotions. And I realised, okay, I've got some emotions about, for instance, emotions about money. Almost everyone on the planet has emotions about money, right? Most of us have a lot of fear-based emotions about money. So okay, I recognise I've got some fear-based emotions about money. If I deal with some of these emotions about money by actually feeling them and releasing them, let's experiment with that and to see whether my attractions with money change. So when I first started doing these talks, for the first 5 years, 4 years probably, the first 4 years, I never received a single donation for the first 4 years. Obviously, I had some emotions about money. Because if I was sitting in an audience listening to a lot of this information, I'd probably donate just without being asked, right? So I had to look at that and go, okay, people appreciate the information, but I'm getting, like, it's getting to the point where I'm going to have to go out and work and stop doing these talks, right? And I didn't want to do that. So I needed to look at myself to see whether there is such a thing as the law of attraction about money. And so what I did was I experimented with that. I went through some emotions and then tried to see whether there was a correlation between dealing with the emotion and an outcome, which was receiving more funds so that I could continue to do these talks. And what I found in the end was that there was a direct correlation. In fact, it often happened the very day that I dealt with a specific emotion related to money. The very next day I would receive some more money to do something that I wanted to do that I couldn't do before then. Right? And so I started to see, well, there's this issue of money, and there was obviously something going on with my feelings of attracting things, not my thoughts. And so now that I've done that with that issue, I can do that, and that's not the first issue I chose. The first issue I chose was with God and a relationship with God, because to me that's the most important thing. But that was just giving you an example of how you can experiment. Most people are not willing to experiment right to the end. And when I say right at the end, most of you will not allow yourself to get completely broke, right, in order to find out what emotions are inside of you that cause your money issues. So what most of us finish up doing is we get down to, you know, what we feel is an acceptable buffer in the bank. And then what do? We then do something physically to go and fix that issue up. Right? That's what we do. Because we're not willing to face the emotion of being destitute. We're not willing to experiment with that emotion. Yes.
So, AJ, do we have to actually get to the point where we're actually broke and have nothing to actually feel the destitute? Oh, that emotion that we need to release?
No, we don't have to.
Yeah.
But as you've found in your own life,
I know.
You didn't do with it before then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
So the reality is we don't have to come up against a wall every time that we deal with something. But unfortunately, for most of us, we're not willing to deal with something before we hit that wall, right?
Is it because, like what I found, it's the process of, it's the process that you go through which allows slowly the different emotions to come up in relation, like, for instance, the money issue.
So if you think about my recommendations to you and to Anto about money issues, you know how you were so afraid to go and buy something because if you bought something, you'd have no money left. And then if you had no money left, then you didn't know what you were going to do, right? And both being professional people, you're used to having a steady buffer and a flow of money, right? So this time you wanted to go and buy something, but you weren't prepared to go and buy it, and there was all this fear driving you. And my recommendation to you guys was buy it, and then because it's what you want.
Yes.
And then let all the emotions come up about not having any money left over to build on it, not having any money. Let all that. And as you've worked out, that's exactly what's coming up for you.
Yeah, but we don't have to get to the point where I'm feeling at the moment a lot of those issues are coming up for both of us. And there's a lot of anger and a lot of fear about it. But but we don't have to get to the point where if we've got zero in the account to deal with that emotion. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it depends on a few things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It depends on how humble you are. Yeah. Because if you're very resistive, you might have to get to that point.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And it depends on how much fear you have. It depends on how much trust in God you have. It depends on how much personal investment you have in the outcome. Can you see, like,
Yeah.
Like,
and the lack of faith too. I'm feeling
yes,
that's a big one in God. Like,
So for many of us, you see, we've got so many different emotions, right, inside of us, and you can see that one little issue, like the money issue, can bring up lots and lots of different emotions that are not childlike inside of us, that they've obviously been modified, and they're no longer childlike. And as a result of that, going through the process will help us immensely to discover these emotions and work our way through them. Now, how bad things get in our life is completely dependent upon how resistive we are to actually having these qualities develop inside of ourselves. Yeah, totally. It depends upon
just to keep focusing on on the humility. That's really.
And having no investment in the outcome, which is very hard, isn't it?
Like,
you like when we talk about money, everybody wants an investment in the outcome, right? And I'm saying no investment in what a child would do. But
sí.
Iván me surgió cuando leía la necesidad de definir inversión en cuanto a invertir energía. Por ejemplo, cuando hablábamos de dónde está tu tesoro, está tu corazón, yo hablo de la inversión en el resultado.
Sí, puedes apuntarlo y lo hablamos al final en la llamada. O sea, si no es para que se oye mal o no se entiende algo.
No.
Bien,
ok.
¿Vale?
Dale.
Porque hemos quedado que lo vemos todo seguido, ¿no? Y luego ya.
Sí.
Apunta lo que puedas. Si quieres, paro para que puedas apuntarlo y luego comentamos.
Ok.
Tú dime cuando sigo.
No, ya está bien. Yo lo hice ahora porque pensé que apuntaba al significado correcto de la palabra, pero no, está bien. Si da para más, lo hablamos al final. Dale.
Sí, es importante porque a mí yo también tengo problemas con esa palabra. Así que si nos acordamos, genial. Bueno, vamos a seguir. Bien.
Dale, seguimos.
Child's perfectly willing to spend its last cent and not know where the next one is coming from. Why? Because the child believes that the next cent is going to come from mummy and daddy. Is that not true? Right. And then we grow up to be an adult, and what do we now believe? The next cent is not going to come from mummy and daddy, but who's your daddy? God's your daddy. God wants to give you everything you want, right?
But AJ, would you still say that that as a child, if we've got that expectation that our mum and dad will provide, we would still have that as adults? Is that true? So
and instead we expect society to provide, or what we do is we refer that emotion onto somebody else generally. So many of us have an expectation for something like unemployment benefits, for example, because of that same feeling that we don't feel that we're able to create ourselves what we need, and without having to work very, very hard for it. Can you see the relationship though between the childlike state, which is this childlike state of daddy gives it $20, the child wants to spend it straight away. Generally, it's very rare that a child wants to save it without having a lot of bartering with mum and dad about that. About daddy goes, do you want to put it in the bank? And why does daddy do that? Because daddy wants to put it in the bank too, but the child generally wants to just go and spend it because it wants to utilise the resources that are available to it instantly. You see? And if we were not living in fear, we would want to do that all the time. We want to utilise the resources available to us instantly. We don't want to store resources away because who knows what will happen tomorrow, might be dead. Like in the first century, I said, I gave an illustration of a man building up lots and lots of storehouses, and he got his very biggest storehouse built, and he died the very next day, that very night. I said in the illustration, and what good was it all to him then? You see, a child doesn't do that. A child just engages the process of using every single investment it gets in a manner that's completely in harmony with no fear and its designs. And when we do that, we get to become very trusting with God.
So, AJ, when's that point? Like, what's the point when we get to that? Like, I feel
when all of these have gone.
The struggle at the moment, like the struggle of that, of I don't know, like
you'll get to it when all of the emotions that are in disharmony with love have been released on the subject of money. Then a feeling of peace will come over you instead of you going, oh, what's going to happen in the next moment?
But how many blocks do we have?
How long is a piece of string, Jane? It depends upon you, your family, your upbringing, how your family brought you up to believe, what they brought you up to believe, what society brought you up to believe. Honestly, if you were living in India, it would be a lot lower threshold. Or if you were living in Somalia, it would be a lot lower threshold than what you currently have. In other words, they would readily accept these beliefs and teachings in comparison to yourself on the subject of money because they have none. And so therefore they've never had any to save, they've never had any to worry about, they've never had any to invest all of this time and energy intellectually and emotionally on. Yeah? And so therefore to them it's not even a problem. Right? So in the Western world, we have a whole set of problems that are very, very different to other parts of the world because of these emotions that are a part of our upbringing. Yeah.
So we just keep,
Yeah, the reason why you're asking the question is because you have fear. You are worried that you're going to have to become destitute before you deal with the emotion. And I'm saying to you, well, perhaps that is going to be required before you unlock yourself from the emotions themselves. It doesn't have to be the case, but it depends. Every single person here is very different with how they've been brought up, right? Even though we've all been brought up in a Western society generally here, we've all been brought up very differently by our parents. And so because of that, we all have very different belief systems about money. And as a result of that, once we start confronting them, it's going to be very, very different emotionally. Yeah. But can you see every time so notice the non-childlike feelings, which are, I'm afraid, I don't have any trust in God, I'm worried about the outcome, I have an investment in the outcome. They're all non-childlike feelings. They're telling us the truth. They're telling us that, yes, there's still emotion there that needs to be addressed, that needs to be released, emotions that are out of harmony with love. Because if we were in love, we wouldn't have fear. There's no fear in love. So if we would go through each day feeling like, oh yeah, like bank account, no bank account, who cares? It's not a lack of responsibility feeling either. I am completely responsible for everything that I spend my money on, as you well know, right? So I'm not encouraging a lack of responsibility here. I'm encouraging trust in God. God provides for every single animal on this earth, and they don't have to do a single thing.
It's the same with us, AJ. Like, we don't have to go back to work. Like, I'm just saying, like, things like that. We feel to get money, we need to go to work. But I think it's because we haven't felt, like, I know personally, because we haven't felt that God can give us the abundance,
exactly.
Like, that we can survive just relying on God.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
And I'm not saying you won't have to work, because obviously working is a part of the things you need to learn about love. Because if you love yourself, you'll want to care for yourself. So that is a part of what you would discover through this process, that I want to love them, but I wouldn't want to work in a job that I hated.
That's the thing, if we're working in, what our desires are, like.
So if Vantu went back to being a lawyer, he'd be totally the opposite of what he doesn't want to do that. He's never really wanted to do that. And so if he went back to that, then of course he wouldn't be loving himself, he'd just be acting out of fear. But there is work that you can engage. Mary and I work pretty much every day, right? As most of you who know us well know, there's very rarely a day goes past where we're having a relaxing day, right? In the sense of not, some kind of work happening. And the reason why is because we love our work, and because we don't even view it as work. Right? So we're just busy every day, just doing what we love doing. And when you engage some kind of a job with that passion that you love doing, things will come to you automatically. And this is what we need to learn from God, and what we need to learn from all the animals, and what we need to learn from our environment. We are the pinnacle of God's creation, and yet we act like we're the least important to God. From God's perspective, we were the pinnacle of his creation, and yet we act like, every single day, we act like God doesn't care about us at all. That's how we act. And yet, we've got plenty of evidence that there's plenty of care around us. It's just a matter of us embracing an attitude or emotion. Yeah? So getting back to the law of attraction question that was asked, so with regard to the money, all I did was experiment with this law of attraction and emotions that actually affected the law of attraction with money, for example. And then as I experimented with that, I saw an immediate result. And therefore I can measure whether I've actually dealt with something or not. And that then causes me to believe in the law of attraction. And it also causes me then to believe more firmly that if I look at my emotions that are out of harmony with love, it will always benefit my life. And now I trust that implicitly. Right? So initially I didn't trust that. Initially I didn't really believe that. But now I trust that implicitly, because I've engaged that, my life is engaging that every single day, and I get results every single day from that. That's why I trust it implicitly.
So you're saying that basically you adopted all these childlike things in your experiment.
Yes.
To get to the conclusion that you're after.
Yes. So you know how the world is addicted to being adult. Like we put on a facade, we get all dressed up, and we get all flash, and we're addicted to the facade. We like, well, a lot of people are dead broke, and yet they're driving around, an expensive vehicle, and they're living in an expensive home and so forth. They're working in a job they don't like to support it all, and they're not living an honest life, because it's nothing what they want, really. They're doing it for emotional reasons. But if they adopted a childlike attitude, does a child live in a facade? Like, a child would do a poo right in front of you. I'm not suggesting that you need to do that, but I'm saying, you go down the lolly aisle, a child will scream and it doesn't get what it wants. And I'm not saying you should do that either, because both things would be out of harmony with love, right? And a child does need to learn what is harmonious with love, but a child is not got this investment in what other people think of it. And as we grow up to be adults, we are totally invested in what other people think of us, right? You think about how much of your life is planned around what other people think of you. A lot of our life is planned around it. And there are whole jobs that are all about that, like the advertising job, the media job, public relations job. Right? They're all about, what are they about? Maintaining image, status, all these kind of things. We in our society, we've created hundreds of jobs invested in maintaining our facade as an adult. When we drop all of that and become childlike, everybody around us is totally confused. Like, I remember the time when we had Channel 7 come and stay with us for a couple of days. These were the guys who finished up doing the Today Tonight show that lied about us the entire time, pretty much. And anyway, they come along and I said to them, look, before you film, I want to have a copy of everything that you film. They agreed with that before they began filming. And I knew, even in that moment, that they would not do it. But I trusted their agreement. Right? So I trusted them, even though I knew, based on their emotional condition, that I could feel from them that they probably wouldn't do that. Then we engaged the process. And I remember sitting down out the front of of our house and doing an interview with one of them, and I said to him, you know, I am giving you an opportunity right now to act more lovingly. He's a minister, this guy. He was doing an interview with me, and he's a minister of a church, was it Knighting Church? Minister, I think it was a Knighting Church. And he's also a member of the media, right? So interesting combination. And he was asking me a series of questions, and I said, well, right now I'm giving you an opportunity. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm giving you an opportunity to prove what your soul is like. Because I'm telling you everything about me. And you can go away and totally lie, or you could tell the truth. And I'm giving you that opportunity. Right now I'm giving you that opportunity. So in that state, I was childlike. I had no investment in the outcome. I could still love the man, right? Now, as it happens, they took that opportunity, and instead of presenting anything honest, they completely manipulated everything into being completely dishonest, right? And like right down to, we have no fences around our property, myself and Mary's property. We've got 2 of our front fence and our side fence have all been taken down. The reason why we took them down was because there were occasional sugar gliders that would land. In the barbed wire fences, and so we just took down all of our fences right around their property. Everyone. We live in a farming community, so that's pretty unusual. Instead of putting in fences, like we're taking out the fences, and they took a photograph of a barbed wire fence and called it our compound. You know? These were 2 guys who lived with us for 2 days, who we fed, we prepared meals for all through that time. This gives you an indication of their decision-making in their soul, right? But now if they were childlike, they would have just been curious, open, transparent. They wouldn't be trying to have an investment on the outcome. But you see, when they began the interview with us, they already had an investment. They already had the angle all decided, right? They already had it all set down, and so they weren't in a childlike mode straight away. But they're interacting with a person who's in a childlike mode all the time, which is very confusing actually for them, right? And so quite often they're saying, but what's the angle? And I'm saying, what angle? There's no angle. Like they asked me about, like, what did I receive donations wise? So I go out and show them what, you know, I told them exactly the donations that we received on that particular weekend that they were with us. And then I told them what we spent it on, because we actually spent more money that weekend than sometimes what I do. And then we actually got in as donations, right? And I realised that they have these editing, you know, where they can edit this and edit that, chop this, chop that, and put this together and make it sound like I'm saying something completely different. And that's okay. If I have no investment, that's okay. That all that is to me is a demonstration of their lack of love. So I said to this minister, you are proving not only to me but also to the world, because you're doing something that's public, that's probably being shown to the world, you're going to prove whether you're loving or not to everybody. You're going to prove whether you're truthful or not to everybody through this process. And I'm giving you the opportunity, because I love you, I'm giving you the opportunity to take that choice. So what choice are you going to make, is what I asked him. Yeah.
was just reflecting on the 6 things you have in the boxes behind you, because obviously I was involved in that experience as well. And I took the same approach as you. I was very open and honest, and I didn't hide anything about us or even about what I felt from them and what I felt their desires were.
So we even told them what we felt their desires were in the process.
Yeah, I felt, look, you know, you're not going to paint me to be irrational. Human being, are you? You're going to make me look like a nut job. And they didn't really even deny that. No. However, I was just reflecting on my emotions and love. Because when that went to air, I can't say I had no investment. I felt pain. I felt pain that people were lying about us. So how do I then discern, how do I grow in love? Like, obviously it wasn't the truth that I was completely childlike with them.
So these are the domain of pain, aren't they?
Yeah.
These emotions here.
And sometimes the first one too feels painful.
Yes. This can also be a painful process because, of course, we can make mistakes and sometimes we can feel the mistakes as pain. This can also be a painful process too, where we actually take an intellectual decision, experiment with it, and experiment in the wrong direction, and in the end end up with a bit of pain. Can you see you've got to have no investment on whether you're going to have pain or not?
Yeah.
Right?
So and that's what I guess I had the intellectual thought of what would love do in this situation. So I was guided by that.
So you tried to be that?
Yes.
Yes.
And so, and
but I weren't always that.
I wasn't always that. At times I felt quite confronted.
Yes.
But I endeavoured to use my intellect to follow the loving path. Yes. And obviously it wasn't emotional because I wouldn't have been.
Aquí cuando has señalado intentaste ser eso, se refiere a las cualidades infantiles para que quede del todo claro. Sigamos.
Come defensive or hurt or whatever. So then that's using my intellect to act in harmony with love.
And the beauty of doing that is that it brought up emotions.
Yes.
And it demonstrated to you all of the emotions inside of you that were out of harmony with love. So for example, the emotion about investment in people's opinion. What would you call that? Well,
approval.
Emotions of wanting approval from the world and acceptance.
Injustice. It brought up injustice.
Injustice.
It also brought up a whole process where I questioned myself.
Where you've doubted yourself, doubt of self, but that's more of a fear.
It sort of exposed fears in me.
Yeah.
I suppose.
All sorts of things.
Yeah.
So the beauty of engaging this process intellectually, acting like this, even though you're just trying to initially, is that eventually it exposed the emotions here, the painful emotions, that were out of harmony with love anyway, which is the beauty of the process. Every process has this power. Yeah.
And that way, in this moment, obviously there's an irony that we're talking about this right now, I feel more in the emotional place of acting lovingly, with more trust.
And you're getting to be more here, aren't you? More where you're prepared to feel pain and you're prepared to experiment, you're prepared to make mistakes, you're prepared to look bad if it means even looking bad, and so forth, right? Which is a part of that process.
Yeah.
Thanks, Faith.
Thanks. I actually made a point of looking at that on YouTube.
Yeah.
Because I met a family member, or a family member as a friend.
Yeah.
And towards the end, I could actually see that the Reverend was very invested in the outcome.
Yes.
And I tried very hard to look at this openly as a new divine path person. And they did say a lot of things that were unflattering, and I intuited to be untrue because they didn't compute with anything that I'd felt or heard watching your DVDs, which is the only way I'd met you prior to today.
Yeah.
But I did feel, particularly at the end when you invited this person to come back and see you again in, say, 10 years or earlier, and he said, sort of guffawed and said, well, not likely. He really did himself a disservice because that made it very clear that he was biased.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that in 10 years' time he's going to desperately want to talk to me. And he's going to have to get over that emotion, unfortunately, of how much he ridiculed the idea 10 years earlier to even do it. Yeah, publicly, to even do it. And yes, I feel with every interaction we have the opportunity to learn more about love in ourselves with every single interaction. And the beauty of engaging any interaction with this kind of attitude is that eventually it will expose our own pains, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing to expose your own pain. It's a good thing to expose your own pain, because once it's exposed, you can release it. Once you can release it, you no longer carry it around. It no longer affects the rest of your life. So it's very important that your own pain is eventually exposed. And it also opens you more up to this idea that you can experiment. You can start going through, not only just intellectually experiment, but you can experiment with your emotions, not just with your thoughts, right? And most of us are very, very unhappy about experimenting with our emotions. We want every emotion to be happy, right? When it's not happy, we're very unhappy, and we don't want to experiment with that feeling either. We don't want to feel that feeling or experiment with that. We're usually a bit more happier to experiment with thoughts. You know, that's why scientists are completely happy to go through the experimentation process with their thoughts, right? They're usually happier to do that. When it comes to experimenting here, that's where we're normally very, very blocked. Right?
AJ, since listening to you or listening to your teachings, I try to apply your concepts to my own life as my experiment. And I can see with 1 and 3, I can see where certainly that applies to my life. But I'm trying to get a sense of whether I've ever experienced the middle grid.
This area here?
Yeah, that area there.
Yeah, it's a very difficult area.
There are times where I feel an emotion that seems to arise spontaneously, and on the heels of that emotion there is a thought that I feel is a truth. I guess some people call it an aha moment, but it seems to be deeper than that.
Yes.
So I just want to know, is that what you mean? Is that an example of that middle area? Just so I can recognise it again if it ever happens.
Yes. What happens initially when we go through this process of opening ourselves? Up and becoming childlike again, is that we generally have only moments in time where we have these things happen. Well, short moments in time where they might last a few minutes, sometimes even just a few seconds initially, yeah? And we need to recognise them for what they are. We need to recognise them as moments where our soul has embraced the truth and that we've not only thought it, but we've also felt it as a truth. And these moments are very, very important to our future development. In fact, they are like building blocks to the rest of our foundation. What happens as you progress is there is generally a cycle in terms of what things happen. Initially, we start off in our progression thinking we know everything and actually knowing nothing. Do you understand that? That's where we generally start. So we think we know everything and we actually know very little is where we start. Then what happens is those 2 points slowly converge, and usually what happens is the thinking we know everything eventually comes down into realising that we know nothing or very little. That is what I call a very special moment, actually. It's a moment now where we've learnt to be far more humble in terms of recognising our true self, right? Now we will start to go through processes which involve both our intellect and our emotions, which cause us to analyse this condition and work upon it if we desire to work upon it. So it's one thing to know that you know nothing, quite another thing to desire to know everything. So we can know everything, like I've stated. But it has to be we have to do a number of different things to do that. Like connection with God is one of those important things. Connection with ourselves. We need to be connected with our emotions and our intellect at the same time. There's a number of things that we need to do, and that is a growing proposition. We can't expect it all to happen instantly, and many of us do expect this. You know, we sort of go, oh. You know, I just said if I feel this emotion, all of a sudden I'll know this thing. And the reality is that is true, but it's not true that you'll know the whole world of things that you need to know in a moment. That kind of thing does not actually ever occur, right? So what we need to do is grow in our knowledge of ourselves, of God, and the universe around us. Does that make sense? Now, that process is going to involve experimenting. It's going to involve mistakes. It's going to involve some pain. It's going to involve confrontation with the world as we know it, because most of the people in the world don't want us to do that. And so we're going to have confrontation occurring as well. All of these different things will occur. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So really, in the second box in the second column, the emotions that are harmonious with love must always be felt as truth.
Yeah.
That's a thing that's going to occur once we've been through all the other boxes pretty much, isn't it?
Yes.
So like with Jane, with her issues about God reliance, say.
With the money issue.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So she has to be very honest about she can intellectually, like many times intellectually we think it's loving to work, but we kind of crush our souls emotionally.
And that's not loving.
Yeah. So
I agree it is loving to work.
Yeah.
But I can't agree that it's loving to work in a job you hate.
Yeah. So then we go over to the emotions that feel painful and we go, okay, there must be something. It seems like a big feedback loop for me.
It is.
Like, so we feed back and we go, okay, I need to modify this intellectual thought that I should be doing this.
Yes.
So what would love be doing?
So love would be embracing a job that I love.
Yeah.
So what I would do is give up the job that I hate and immediately, not put it off, embrace the job I love and see what happens.
Yeah, and so then I go into the emotions that I'm not sure of the answer, but I feel like, well, God would probably provide for me if He created me with this unique soul.
So that's passion. A thought.
That's a thought, yeah.
So that's a possibility only because I haven't yet known it as a truth.
So then I
embrace the process. I become open and transparent.
Become very afraid.
Yes, that's a part of it.
Así que es una posibilidad, solamente es una posibilidad, porque todavía no lo reconoció como verdad. Esto creo que sería mejor. Seguimos.
experiment.
Yeah.
The part of the experiment is to bring up all of your fear and bring up all of your rage and your anger and
But
your
then I
sadness.
would say, then I would go, go to that box and go, hang on, this emotion is not harmonious with love, so I shouldn't do what it says. I should let my
So the emotion might be you embrace the job, and 2 weeks after embracing this new job that you love, you've got no money. So what's the emotion?
terror.
Well, it begins with fear, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So fear-based emotion. So I know the fear is not love, right? Fear is not love. And I know that my fear is not love. So what do? I continue to embrace the job and feel my fear. So, because remember I said, anything emotion that's out of harmony with love, fear is one of those emotions, needs to be released. And the only way you can release it, and we can talk more about this as we go, but the only way we can release it is by feeling it. So we have to actually feel it. The fear, but we still engage the job. And what will happen is when we release the fear of having no money, then we'll start getting some. Right?
But what I feel is that very often we get to that point, we feel afraid, we go, oh, my experiment didn't work. God doesn't work like that.
Dios no funciona así, también podríamos decir, que se podría.
Yes, we give up the experiment just when it's about to teach us something.
We go hopeless instead of fearful.
Yes. We give up the experiment at the wrong time.
Yeah.
You see, we need to carry the experiment fully through, right the way through the emotion.
And we need to use it seems to me, we need to use our intellect to because emotionally nothing's it's all stirred up.
Emotionally, inside we're screaming at ourselves going, stop this insanity, stop. Emotionally, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
but intellectually we're going, no. We're looking at the emotion, we're going, no, that's an emotion out of harmony with love because it's fear.
Yeah.
And I know that anything that's out of harmony with love must be addressed and must be released. I've got to be, and the way I release it is by feeling it. So I have to feel it without acting upon it, without deciding to act in harmony with how the emotion is. Dictating me to act.
Yeah.
If I know I love the job, I stay with loving the job.
And that to me, that makes it a whole network of discovering truth then. And
yes.
This is the synthesis. You're talking about, isn't it? I need to be able to engage both sides.
Yes.
And go, hang on, I know this. I know in box 1 or in box 3, I'm sure. Sorry, 2. In box 4, I'm sure that love is like this.
Yeah.
So when I'm feeling something, I have to remember it's an error. Yeah. Sorry.
Exactly. So what we need to do is we need to stop just responding to every emotion, because many of our emotions are going to be out of harmony with love, and we need to stop responding to them. We need to feel them, but not respond to them. Do you understand the difference? Responding to them is living in them. Feeling them is just feeling them pass through you. So feel terrified, feel terrified. Let yourself feel terrified, but don't change your action just because you're terrified, unless you're in a life-threatening situation, right? Don't change your action. And most of the time our fear comes up way out of harmony with what the actual environment is saying. That's most of the time. Do you understand? And the difference, so we need to embrace the process, and as we embrace the process, whenever we get out of harmony with a childlike state, we know we're in error straight away. As soon as we're out of harmony with the childlike state, we are in error. We know we're in error. And so intellectually we can go, I know I'm in error. Emotionally, you might feel, no, damn this, no. Emotionally, you might be saying, no, I've got to go and get a job. I've got to go and get a job. I've got to go and get a job. Like, I have to do it. I have to do it. Like, that's emotionally what's screaming at you. But intellectually, you can still observe that emotion and go, yeah, you're just in error still. Because once you release this emotion, this panic will be gone from you. This panic and terror will be gone.
So what about if you have the opposite injury, which is, no, I don't think that I should have to work. Like, I've grown up in a family where a lot of things are done for me, and I feel like I'm entitled to expect.
So you experiment with that. You sit home on your bum, and you don't work.
There's no terror. There's
no terror.
I
just kick it back, relaxing. And eventually my house gets taken away from me, my car gets taken away from me, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything, everything's taken away from me. And I'm sitting there and I'm still pondering, no, I still feel I'm in harmony with love. Obviously not.
Well, so, by then you're probably getting angry, aren't you?
Well, exactly. By then you're getting angry, the expectations are coming up, the demand that society meets your addictions comes up. And so by then you're already starting to address some of the reasons why you sat on your backside doing nothing. Yeah. But can you see the way we've got to be willing to experiment? Right, so that's the important thing. Yes? Yeah. Now, everyone.
I'm getting a lot of this intellectual, and I've realised that I live, breathe, eat, sleep, anger and fear. Apart from a few little aha moments where I think, I've done a tiny little bit of love. And intellectually I know that the process...
Can I just stop you there? So you said you eat, sleep, breathe, anger and fear.
Yeah.
Can I, before you go on with your next part, this is a very good state. Because remember you started off, it doesn't feel good, no, but it is a very good state. Remember you started off believing you had no fear and you had no anger. And now at least you know the truth. And that is, no, anger and fear dictates a lot of my life. That is the truth.
Yeah.
And knowing that truth is very, very powerful, because now you have the ability to change. If you didn't know that truth, you'd never change. So you're at the state now where I feel, I talked about the conversion points. There was the point of what we believe. That says believe. And then there's the point of what we actually are, what is real or actual. And what's happened is those 2 points now for you have started to converge. This is progress. This is called progress. Now, unfortunately, though, the reason the world itself doesn't view it as progress, you see. So everybody else judges that as a lack of progress. But no, this is progress. This is true progress, because now we've come to terms with what really drives us. And this is wonderful. You need to see it as wonderful.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
I've worked through it.
You will afterwards. Go through the answer, yes. So let's proceed with your question.
The thing is, and intellectually, I also understand that, like, I've done some processing.
Yes.
And I know it works.
Yes.
And I've tried to do anger. Mm-hmm. Now, I injure myself every time.
Yes.
And a lot of it's been coming up for me.
Yes.
And I'm sitting in it. And I think, what's stopping you? Why aren't you? I know the process. I know what to do.
It's a very good question. What's stopping you? So let's answer it. Has everyone got that? Can I rub that off? Because we need to do some more diagrams now. Okay. I want to leave that childlike stuff there if I can. So mistakes, questions, leave that there. To process any emotion, we need to understand its dynamics. In other words, how it gets created. That makes sense, doesn't it? If we understand how it gets created, then we have a chance to process it. So let's look at all of our emotions and how they get created. During our childhood, grief is a fairly common emotion, actually, because any time that our parents suppress us, we will experience some feelings of not being loved. And any time our parents go into rage or anger or fear, we will feel the feelings of not being loved. Does that make sense? Now, because we feel those feelings of not being loved, every single time there'll be some pain. Because whenever we're not loved, pain is always an associated emotion. So grief is something, and underlying everything is a underlying grief that we weren't loved somehow. That starts everything. But what happens is that we were taught to suppress our grief, usually by being punished. So for most of us, we were punished in some way whenever we experienced grief. So usually we got a belting, or we were told to shut up. There was anger. Often it was a combination of anger and a belting. Whenever a child has a good cry, that's generally the result. So the next layer of emotions that we learn to live through are fear-based emotions. Make sense so far? Then what we do is we don't like feeling fear, because fear is a terrible feeling to feel. It's one of the most difficult emotions actually for most people to feel. And so what we do is we enter into addictions in order to avoid the fear. Right with us so far? So now we've got a layer of addictions that are inside of us, and the addictions can be physical. So in other words, they could be drink, smoking, drugs, whatever, right? Sex, whatever. It can be emotional addictions, and emotional addictions are things like, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. You want other people to think want other people to approve of you, to think that you're good, to be accepted, to be cared for. And there's all these addictions. We just have a long list of emotional addictions. We also have some spiritual addictions, actually, many of us. Sometimes we're addicted to not believing in God at all. Sometimes we're addicted to believing in God, but a God of punishment. And therefore, we create a whole lot of religious expectations as a result. So these are all addictions. Now, when any of our addictions do not get met, the initial response is anger. So anger is the layer above our addictions. Yes? So understand that every time you're feeling your anger, it's because you're refusing to feel your addictions. Yeah, no? Keep going.
I get the theory of it.
Yeah,
and
no?
I sit there telling myself, well, I'll watch myself, somebody hasn't met an addiction, I'll get angry at them. Right, your addiction, why this? Now you're feeling angry, go and kick something. So I do my back in. And
are you prepared to feel your addiction? See, these are all feelings, if I can just explain. These are all feelings, yes? Feelings or emotions. All of these. Right? They're all feelings. To get to the next layer of feelings, you have to be prepared to feel the layer that blocks you. So, if I am in anger, I need to be prepared instead to feel my fear. And this is where you're struggling, because you're not always prepared to feel your fears, to actually feel them.
I felt a lot of them, I think, or am I still doing spirit fears?
Well, no, I feel you're starting to get into this process, because the beauty of what you've done up to now is you had what you believed you were like and what was real. So this is the bottom line here, what is really you. And now you've got to the point where you've recognised, wow, I'm just full of fears, and those fears cause me to be angry. Now, understand though, the fears don't cause you to be angry. It's your unwillingness to feel them that causes you to be angry.
So when I'm trying to be angry and I get really tired or I hurt myself or do something else, it's because I'm not willing to feel the fear. Yes,
you want the addiction met rather than feeling the fear that the addiction covers, to actually feel it. So most of our addictions are related to feelings of not being loved, not being wanted, not being accepted, not being approved of, and so forth.
Pretty much covered them.
Yeah. And what we do is we set up our addictions to meet all of those fears. So our addictions are like, if I have an interaction with you, I've got to be, I can't confront you, because if I confront you, you don't feel that's approval, and therefore it's not meeting one of your addictions, and therefore it's triggering a fear, and then you don't like your fear being triggered of not being approved of, and so then you revert to anger. Does that make sense? There's a cycle that goes on there. And if we understand that dynamics, initially we have to understand it with our mind, like you've done. Now the step you're taking is to going into understanding it emotionally. Now that requires you to actually feel the emotion. That's the part that's hard. That's the part that everybody gets stuck on. Everybody, not just a wearer, right? Every single person I've ever known who's ever come across the divine love path gets stuck at the point of feeling their fears.
All right, so I want to know what to do about it. Like,
that's also a fear.
Yeah, I'm still looking for my manual.
What does a child do? The child just feels it without the angle, without wanting to understand what it has to feel. The child just goes ahead and feels it, chooses to feel it. And this is one of the constructs that we have as an adult, that we believe we have to understand it before we can feel it. A child doesn't understand it, and yet it feels it and releases it pretty much straight away. So there's a process we need to get back to. So what you're doing is going through a process of releasing this adult way of dealing with problems and getting back to the childlike way, which is actually a very rapid way of dealing with problems. Now, I'm not suggesting that all children are loving, because that is certainly not true. What I am suggesting is the way they handle emotions is the fastest way generally to releasing them, right? Even their unloving ones. Now, I've given you examples of this before where I've seen a child like come up and hit somebody. Like just a few weeks ago, we were staying with a couple, and it was a couple of months ago, probably now, a couple of months ago, wasn't it? Where the child, and I'll give you another example, actually, just happened probably 4 weeks ago. We were at a seminar, and this child just ran riot in the seminar, like, distracting everybody. His mother, just sat there doing nothing at all, just sat there watching the riot. She was the only person probably who could concentrate because she's so used to the riot that everybody else was always distracted. And then we showed a movie, and he was back and forward, yelling through the movie, and it was very interruptive, the whole process. So the child obviously not being very loving, right? So I went to talk with both her and him after the seminar, and she asked me, how do I handle, like, she recognised that the child's behaviour was unloving. She could also see her own behaviour was unloving because she didn't take the child out while it was being such a disturbing so many people. So she could see her own behaviour was unloving. So I talked to her about that. And then she asked me the question, how would you deal with the child? I said, it's very simple. I got the little lad, and all I did was squatted down like this and just held him to my body and didn't allow him to move. How many seconds do you think it took before he was screaming? It took about 2 seconds. and he was screaming. And then while he was screaming, I was talking to his mum. I was saying, see, your child does not like being restricted. He doesn't even like being restricted in a loving manner. Right? He doesn't like being told that he can't do something. He doesn't like being, he likes being unloving. I said, now watch what happens. I let him go. He went up and punched his mother as hard as he could in the leg as soon as I let him go. And she watched that occur and did nothing. Did nothing. And so I firstly addressed that she did nothing. And then I grabbed him again and held him again and said to him, you can't punch your mother anytime. And I'm going to hold you here until you stop screaming about it. Because he wanted to go up and punch her again. So I just held him. It was outside of a public place, and she became so embarrassed because I held him for about 5 minutes only. Everybody inside the hall heard him because he was just screaming his lungs out.
Aquí es la madre la que se avergonzaba, se avergonzó mucho.
And if it was me, I would have just stayed holding him until he began to cry, properly cry, like grieving cry. Because what he had to do is he had to go through his addiction not getting met. And when you go through your addiction not getting met, you revert to anger, and then you drop down into your fear, and then you'll get eventually to your grief as a feeling. Now, I've done that with other children, and it's taken 1.5 to 2.5 hours generally of holding them which requires a lot of love on your part, right, to do that without feeling bad and without feeling guilty and eventually they've dropped into their grief. And after they've dropped into that grief, they never do the same thing again, ever, right? Never do it again. Unless the parent reinfects them with the same emotion. Right? They'll never do it again. Now, most parents are unwilling to do that with their child, and you know why? Because they're unwilling to do it with themselves. Right? What do I mean by that? Most of us have all of these addictions in play in our life, and we're totally unwilling to accept them not being met. Totally unwilling. We want every single addiction in our entire life to be met. That's our problem. Right? And we think we should be able to get away with that, and we can't. We're not going to be able to get away with that. If we want to become loving, we're not going to be able to get away with that. Because a lot of our addictions are unloving, both to ourselves and to other people. So what we're going to need to do is confront our addictions. When we confront them, we will feel anger. You will feel anger. Initially, when you first confront them, you feel like anger is the only thing you ever felt, is the feeling that you feel. You go through this period of anger, which it can last weeks or months, and I've seen it last years for some people, where they've been just angry, and then recognising they're angry and seeing that the addiction's not getting met. If you're willing, if you have a willingness to face your fear, you will be a lot less angry if you have a willingness to face your fear. But a lot of people have very little willingness initially to face their fears.
So what you're saying is I'm making a choice not to feel my fear.
Yes. It's a choice. Spot on. It's a very good intellectual realisation to have. Yeah. The key is to translate that now into an emotional realisation of, wow, if I choose to feel my fear, then I'll never get angry again. That's a pretty amazing thing when you think about it, isn't it? That if I actually choose to
I
feel all
don't
of my
make that
feelings.
choice emotionally. Like intellectually, I've made the choice. Emotionally, I haven't got and obviously clearly don't want to do it.
Yes, and that's the case for most people. And so what you need to do is look at the addictions and why you want them fulfilled. So Mary, you want to comment? Mary's going through the same process of error, so we prefer her to comment about.
Yeah, I feel there's a space where you feel the addiction, where it's like initially it feels like whenever the addiction isn't met, I'm in anger. Automatically, my soul is just still so decidedly avoiding the fear that I just jump straight to anger. But it feels like there's a space where I can feel my addiction, like emotionally feel.
You know, it's like if you could liken it to like a person who's giving up smoking and they badly want to go and buy another pack, you know, that feeling that they have. Or a person who's giving up drugs, or a person who's giving up drinking and they badly want the drink. And they're pounding around the house, you know, looking for the cupboard that's got the spare bottle, or they're pounding around the house looking through the rubbish to find the butt that's half smoked, you know, like. Now, in that space, that's what we're like emotionally. We're the same as that emotionally. We're pounding around trying to get. What we've got to do is be observant enough to see, what am I doing? I'm looking through a rubbish bin for a cigarette. You know, like what am I doing to myself here? Like, you've got to see that place and decide to not take the addictive action, and instead feel what you're afraid of, instead of taking the addictive action. And that takes a lot of self-observation to do that.
Yeah, and it feels emotional too. Like I've done that intellectually and prevented a lot of my addictions, but my soul's still driving things. So it feels like there's an emotional place I get to where emotionally I feel like, oh, I really want this emotion from someone. I really want this thing. And it's like an emotional realization that that's not loving or something. And then my fear kind of
starts to feel, yeah. Because a lot of times when we're getting the addiction met, we notice it, we go, wow, I'm doing that. Like, there's this point of recognition generally where we go, wow, look what I've just done with my son. My daughter, my mother, my father, my wife, my husband, whatever it is, who's close to us, my workmate, my friend, or whatever. Look what I just did. That was just totally driven by the fact that I want to avoid the fear. And when they didn't give me what I wanted back, I just feel angry with them straight away. That tells me I'm still wanting my addiction met, right? So what I do is I acknowledge that, right? I need to acknowledge that I want this addiction met. Once I've acknowledged that I want the addiction met, now I have the opportunity to examine the fear that's underneath it. Now, firstly, intellectually, I'll examine the fear, but remember, that was only one half of the equation. We've got to get to the other half of the equation, which is emotionally feeling the fear. That's when most people go like that, right? And they throw their hands up and everything else that are in their hands in the air, and they want to give up, right? They want to throw in the towel, as the saying goes, right? We've got to get beyond that point and into the point of actually feeling the emotion. Once you feel the emotion, you'll be surprised at how rapidly you can work your way through the emotion, but it will feel distressing, because every error-based emotion is distressing to feel and release, because you feel like you're giving up something that's a part of you, and it is a part of you. It's been a part of you for how long have you been alive now? Like 50 years. So it's been a part of you for 50 years. A lot of these emotions have been, a lot of these emotions were created within the first 7 years of your existence, and the rest of the time we've been living in them. And of course, after 43 years of living in them, it's going to be like, they're going to feel like they are just a part of our very nature. And when we give them up, it feels like a part of us is getting torn out of us. and it's going to feel painful. But once it's gone, now we will never, ever, ever even have the emotion to respond to inside of us. So anger cannot come up because the fear is gone and we've dealt with the grief on that particular issue. So the anger on that particular issue just does not arise anymore. Right? So there are issues that years ago I used to get very angry about, and now no anger at all comes up in the same situation. Right? And the reason why is once you've dealt with the emotion and released the emotion, it's like there's no need for anger anymore because there's no addiction anymore involved in the process. You're not feeling an addiction anymore that you badly want to get fulfilled. So the key is to be patient with yourself, right? Which is something that your parents told you not to be, right? And you need to be patient with this process. So yes, you've spent a lot of time learning about the psychology of it, shall I call it, the intellectual part of it. Now you're actually putting it into practice. Putting it into practice is much more difficult than learning about it intellectually, right? But the reality is that until you put it into practice, you won't really understand it either. So that's also a reality. Yeah. Now, what we do with these, and perhaps what we need to do is have a break in a second, so everyone needs to have a break. So what we do with this, we need to discuss in terms of how this affects the other part. We need to put the two things together now of what we've discussed. With this particular flow of emotion and compare it with those two columns that we created earlier about what we do with our intellect in terms of determining truth and what we do with our emotions in terms of determining truth, and come up with some practical examples and situations where we can reflect upon what would we do in these practical examples. Now, the problem with any practical example is that every one of them is individual in nature and so therefore cannot be applied right across the board to every single thing. So please remember that when we come up with these practical examples, go back to the underlying theory, if you like, which is the two columns, the intellectual side, those 3 points that we raised on the intellectual side, the 3 points we raised on the emotional side. This is the general level of emotion that's in us. Almost every emotion that we've got that's out of harmony with love can be fit into one of these areas of emotions, right? And so all we need to do is understand the relationship between these types of emotions, what's going on in our intellect and what's going on in our emotional self, and we'll have a great way of determining the truth of our life, but not only the truth of our life, but also the truth about the universe in the process. Yeah? So let's have a break.
Bien, pues aquí termina lo que sería la primera parte. Luego, o sea, ahora está anunciando que hacen un descanso y luego ya se tiran 1 hora y media más, pues con lo que acaba de anunciar ahora, que es intentar hablar conjuntamente de todo lo que han visto un poco. Así que, pues nosotros lo comentaremos también ahora tendremos un rato seguramente, ¿verdad? Vamos a cortar y comentamos algunas cosas de estos con el texto delante. Vamos al servicio y todo lo que nos haga falta o lo que sea. ¿Estamos ahí vivos?
Sí, totalmente. Dale, hacemos eso. Nos reencontramos enseguida.
Muy bien.
Muchas gracias.
Pues gracias y ya dejamos aquí y os invitamos a eso, al vídeo que subiré después de este, un día o dos después de este. Hasta el siguiente.